Has this ever happened to you? A woman disappears. Not in rage, not in storm, not with dramatic farewell, but with an unsettling stillness, a silence that echoes louder than any scream. One moment she is there watching you with eyes that see too much, and the next she is simply gone. No closure, no warning, just absence. And somehow that emptiness begins to weigh more than her presence ever did. You see, this kind of vanishing isn't about escape. It's not revenge and it's not confusion. It is transformation. It is the sacred retreat of a woman who has finally realized the depth of her own power and no longer wishes to waste it where it cannot be seen. Carl Jung once said that what you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. And the woman you refuse to see clearly, the one whose emotional complexity you dismissed, whose intuition you ignored, has now taken root in the soil of your unconscious. Her silence becomes your echo chamber. Her absence becomes your mirror. And your shadow, the very part of you that recoiled from her depth, begins to ache in her void. The vanishing woman is not weak. She is the one who loved from the soul but refused to beg from the wound. Her leaving is not abandonment, it is reclamation. Reclamation of self, of sanity, of sacred energy drained by trying to be understood by a man not yet brave enough to meet his own reflection. Because make no mistake, her love held a mirror. It showed him not just who he was, but who he could be if he dared face himself. But ego doesn't like mirrors. It prefers praise. It wants devotion, not challenge. So he turned away, and she quietly, entirely walked into the realm of women who no longer explain their pain. And now the shadow begins its work. In Jungian terms, the shadow is not evil, it is simply unseen. It is the part of the psyche that holds everything we reject, everything we deny, everything too tender or too ugly for our conscious identity to admit to. And her disappearance rips the veil from that hidden world. Suddenly the man is left alone, but not truly alone. He is now accompanied by memories, regrets, and the haunting realization that he never really knew the woman, and never truly knew himself. She became a ghost, not because she died, but because he never fully saw her when she was living beside him. Now every silence reminds him of hers. Every new face carries the weight of what he could not receive. He'll try to replace her. He'll search for her softness in others, her fire, her quiet wisdom, but she cannot be replaced. Because she was not just a woman. She was initiation. And he failed the test. There are women who leave with rage and bitterness. Their absence is loud, filled with accusations and pleas. But the vanishing woman is different. Her absence is spiritual. She doesn't leave you. She leaves your reality. She exits the entire frequency where she once had to shrink, apologize, explain. She sheds that skin like a snake who has outgrown old illusions, and she walks barefoot into the unknown, unburdened by your inability to love her. And you, if you are the man left behind, you don't miss her warmth. You miss what her warmth revealed in you. You don't crave her body. You crave the safety you felt when she looked at you and saw more than your wounds. You miss the silence between her words, the way she could sit with your chaos and not flinch. She made your darkness feel like dusk, not death. She was the moon in your night. But you forgot even the moon has phases. And when a woman like this fades, she does not retreat in defeat. She retreats in wisdom. She becomes a mystery. She becomes myth. And in that myth, men begin to awaken. Not all. Some never will. But for the few who dare to descend into the underworld of their own psyche, she becomes the whisper that leads them back to soul. Her silence initiates his journey. Not toward her, but toward himself. And if he's brave, he will finally meet the man she once saw in him. But by then, she is no longer waiting. She has become the goddess of her own life. Unreachable. Unapologetic. Unbound. He begins to notice it in the quiet moments when the noise of the world dies down, and there is no distraction left to shield him from the echo. Her absence doesn't scream. It lingers, like incense in a temple long after the prayer has ended. Her memory arrives not in images but in sensations, the stillness she carried, the way her gaze could disarm him, the strange ache he felt in her presence, as if some deeper part of him knew she would never stay. This is the weight of a woman who vanishes without a word. She doesn't need to curse him. Her disappearance becomes the teacher. For what could wound a man more than the realization that someone once saw him? And he looked away. Jung taught that the feminine is the gateway to the unconscious, the anima, the soul image, the vessel through which a man begins to know himself. But most men resist this passage. They don't want the depth. They want devotion without danger, love without reflection. They want the softness of the rose without the pain of the thorn. But a true woman, a whole woman, she is both. She's not the illusion of the feminine. She is the feminine, deep fluid while still. And to love her is to walk into the forest of one's own soul, unsure of what will be found, but knowing there is no other way. So when she walks away, when she vanishes, it's not because she didn't love. It's because her love reached its limit. She saw he was not ready. Not ready to confront the boy who still lived inside him, the one clinging to comfort, validation, control. She saw he was not yet a man, not in the sacred sense, not a man who had faced his shadow and lived to tell the truth of it. And she would not mother that child. A woman like this is not born to heal your wounds while forgetting her own. She is not a muse. She is not a rescue mission. She is a mirror one that reflects what you hide and invites you to rise. But when you shatter the mirror, you don't kill the truth. You only blind yourself. And so her silence becomes the last thing he hears. And in that silence, something ancient begins to stir. Regret, yes. But more than that, recognition. Recognition that she wasn't asking too much. She was showing him what more could look like. More depth. More honesty. More presence. And he in his fear reduced her into something small enough to manage. Something to control. Something to dismiss. But now in the night, he feels it, the gravity of what she carried. The subtle ways she made space for his unspoken dreams. The time she stayed silent when she could have destroyed him with truth. The time she forgave what he didn't even realize he was doing. And yet she said nothing. Until she said nothing at all. Her vanishing was the final act of love. The refusal to keep bleeding for someone unwilling to stop the knife. The choice to protect her own spirit instead of saving his. And the shadow begins its slow alchemy. For the man who chooses to wake up her absence becomes the fire that purifies. It burns away the false self, the performative masculinity, the entitled hunger. And in its place, something softer begins to take shape, but not weaker. A different strength. The kind that bends, listens, weeps, learns. The kind of strength that no longer fears being fully seen. But for the man who continues to run, she becomes a myth he cannot escape. He'll find pieces of her in every woman he touches, and none of them will satisfy. Because once you've met a woman with soul, a woman who mirrors your truth, your body might forget, but your shadow never will. She doesn't haunt him. She inhabits him. Like an echo in the bones. A whisper in the silence. A name that never leaves the lips but lives in the heartbeat. And maybe if he ever becomes the man she already saw within him, he will no longer need her to come back. Because her gift wasn't meant to stay. It was meant to awaken. And now he must walk alone into the dark, carrying the light she left behind. Somewhere deep in the unconscious, a shift begins. It is not sudden. It is not dramatic. But it is real. Like the slow thaw after a long winter, he begins to feel again, not just want, not just lust, but longing. Not for her return, but for reunion, not with her, but with the part of himself that died the moment she walked away. Jung warned us. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And this is what happens to the man who watches a woman vanish in silence. He begins to see the wreckage of his own unconscious behavior, the patterns he blamed on others, the chaos he mistook for passion, the avoidance he wore as independence. He begins to realize how often he confused her boundaries with rejection, her depth with danger, her detachment with arrogance. The tragedy was never that she left. The tragedy is that he never truly arrived. But the soul has its own timing. And suffering that old relentless teacher begins to shape him. Her absence becomes the altar. Not to worship her, but to confront himself. To kneel before the ashes of what could have been and ask not, why did she leave, but what part of me refused to stay? The answers will not flatter. They never do. Because true awakening begins with ruin. It begins with the raw honesty that you let something sacred slip through your fingers. Not because you didn't care, but because you didn't know how to receive what she was offering. A woman like her offers no small love. She does not come bearing comfort alone. She comes to stretch you, to awaken the divine masculine, to burn away the falsehoods you've hidden behind. And if you were not ready to be burned, then yes, you felt her love as fire. But now you sit in its embers, learning to make meaning from the flame. This is the essence of initiation. This is the underworld of manhood that too many never enter. They flee from it, distract from it, seduce their way around it. But eventually, every man who seeks wholeness must walk through this valley alone, stripped, haunted by the one woman who refused to dim her light just to fit inside his shadow. And as he descends, the memories return, not just the soft moments, but the hard ones too. The conversation she tried to have, but he deflected. The moments her voice trembled and he turned cold. The 1,000 silent sacrifices she made in the hope that he would notice. The grace she gave without thanks. The prayer she whispered for a man who still wasn't listening. He sees it now not as manipulation, not as drama, but as devotion. A fierce, sacred devotion that only a woman in her fullness can give. And he threw it away. Not in a single act, but slowly, unconsciously, with every shrug of his heart. So she left. But her echo stayed. And in that echo lives the question that breaks him. Would he have done it differently if he had truly known what she was? It is the kind of question that cannot be answered. Not by words. Only by what he becomes in the years after. For some men, this moment becomes the seed of transformation. They begin to study themselves the way she once studied them. They begin to nurture what they once neglected, their emotions, their presence, their silence. They stop performing and start being. They let go of the need to conquer women and begin to wonder how to honor them. They realize that power is not in control. Power is in presence. And this is what she always knew. Because when she loved from the center of herself. There was no mask, no manipulation. Just the raw, wild, honest expression of a woman who had met her own shadow and had come out radiant. But she would not shrink to be understood. She would not bleed to be accepted. She would not chase a man still running from himself. And so now her vanishing becomes his story. Not one of betrayal, but of awakening. And for the man who is willing, truly willing, to let her absence teach him, she becomes the reason he rises. He does not return to her. He returns to himself. The man who faces the truth of his own shadow begins to see the subtle places where he once allowed his ego to dictate his life. He sees the ways in which he wore masks, performed roles, clung to false identities to avoid confrontation with the depth of his own being. The woman who vanished, who walked away into silence, she was not just a reflection of his desires. She was the mirror that reflected his truths, hidden and inconvenient. And once she disappears, those truths come rushing to the surface like a torrent breaking through a dam. In his isolation, the weight of his own unconscious patterns becomes undeniable. He begins to understand how much of his past relationships and even his present self were built on a fragile foundation, a foundation held together by illusions of power, control, and security. He thought that by keeping his heart protected, by maintaining a distance from vulnerability, he could escape the chaos of his own emotions. But now, without the woman who once held up the mirror, he sees how deeply fractured his identity truly is. This is the essential work of the shadow, to face the disowned parts of oneself, the aspects of the psyche that have been cast away in fear or ignorance. The woman who vanished without a word is the catalyst for this work. She forced him through her absence to confront the man he was avoiding becoming. She was not just a partner, a lover, or a companion. She was the invitation to his own transformation. The fact that she is gone doesn't lessen her power. In fact, it heightens it. Her departure has left a void that cannot be filled by any woman, no matter how hard he tries to replace her. This is not a journey of longing for what was lost. It is a journey of becoming, of shedding the layers of the false self and embracing the deeper, truer man that was always waiting to emerge. The man who can sit in the silence of his own thoughts, who can stand in the face of his fears, and who can look into the mirror and see not just the ego, but the soul behind it. This is the man who can finally understand what it means to love not with need, but with presence. But before he can step into this new way of being, there is another realization that must unfold the truth of his relationship to the feminine. He begins to understand that the woman who vanished was never simply an object of desire. She was a symbol of the feminine force, not the passive, docile archetype society often imposes on women, but the wild, untamable force of life itself. She was the embodiment of the deep feminine that seeks connection, not validation, power, not permission, authenticity, not submission. And she left not because she didn't love him, but because she refused to compromise her truth for someone too afraid to confront his own. The man who becomes aware of this feminine force, who learns to honor it not just in women but in himself, understands that the feminine is not something to be conquered or possessed. It is something to be received. The ego-driven man seeks to dominate. The man in touch with his soul seeks to be in harmony. And it is only in this state of balance when a man can embrace his own feminine energy with as much reverence as he does his masculine that he can truly begin to understand the nature of real intimacy. This is why when a woman vanishes without a word, the man is left with the question, who am I without her? At first, this question may be crippling. It may feel like a loss too great to bear. But over time, if he is willing to do the work, it becomes the key to his own rebirth. For in the absence of the woman, he finds the space to meet himself. And when he does, he begins to understand that the depth he was once afraid of, the silence he tried to avoid, was never her power alone, it was his power too. And from this place of raw, unguarded self-awareness, he can finally begin to see the woman for who she truly was, not as an object of desire, but as a mirror to his soul. A woman who walks away without a word is not rejecting him. She is choosing herself. And in that choice, she gives him the ultimate gift, the opportunity to choose himself too. The journey that began with his regret now turns into something more powerful. It turns into freedom. The freedom to no longer chase, no longer perform, no longer seek validation from others. The man who has learned to face the silence of his own soul has transcended the need for external affirmation. And it is in this place of peace, of deep inner knowing, that he becomes truly free. And so the woman who vanishes, she is not gone forever. She has left her mark. She has planted the seed of transformation, and if he dares to water it, it will grow into something magnificent. Not just in the way he relates to her, but in the way he relates to himself, to the world, to every woman who crosses his path. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.